Okay. So thank you everyone for joining us today for our session on the role of education and training in the economic recovery. So we have a really exciting panel today. Heather, McKay, and I are chairing this, so we'll both kind of tag team a little bit on coordinating the panel here. But we have a great group of speakers here, kind of thinking about all sort of changes in the economy and ways to help American workers in getting back into high quality employment and adapting to changes in the labor market. So without much ado, I want to just quickly introduce our speakers and let everyone take off. First paper is Justin Vinton, who's going to be presenting a paper on the U.S. system of skills development for technical workers and looking at the European Union for practices for technicians. The next paper will be Hope Kottner, who's going to talk about some work underway looking at community colleges and technician programs and how they're adapting to the changing nature of work and workers. And final paper will be presented by Iris Palmer, who'll be talking about some new strategies to implement non-degree credentialing programs. And then last but not least, we'll have Steve Crawford, who will be our discussant to reflect on these papers and add some additional commentary from all of his experience. So I'll let Justin take over, begin.
And just some ground rules, if folks want to put questions into the chat, please do that and I'll collect them. And I'll do some timing for you speakers. So I'll give you a heads up if it goes crazy.
Great, thanks. Can everyone see my screen here? Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right. So thanks everyone, Heather, Michelle, thank you for organizing this. So I'll be talking about EU models and highlights of vocational education, training, and technician education, and ends with some implications for the US and what models or parts of models might be able to be applied in the US, and revisit that debate. So this is work coming out of the School of Management and Labor Relations at Rutgers University with Heather and Michelle, as well as another colleague, James, of ours at the school. So first I want to kind of put this in context and why we're discussing about it and the future of work and workers, technicians being a very important part of that, because they're the vocational workers who are key players in the changing nature of work and economic growth. We always talk about them when we're talking about the future of work, and they are very active at firm and regional level innovations. And they are kind of these practical implementers of research and technology on the ground level. So the broader question here is, so how are states, employers, and unions providing vocational education and training? And by state, and this is kind of a European aspect to thinking about the state, it includes school systems, like including secondary and tertiary vet schools and institutions. So we're looking at what models work well, what practices within those models could be applied elsewhere and shared and built upon. We're not the first to do this. Others who've been at LIRA are part of the MIT task force on the work of the future. They've been thinking about this a lot. So we're contributing to this debate here. But I think one thing that is important to think about it in looking at the EU is there's this discussion and theory based in the comparative political economy literature, and specifically there's a varieties of capitalism literature, which within that area that talks about liberal market economies being the US and the UK, and then more coordinated market economies, which are more like Germany and Denmark. And a lot of times there's this idea within that literature that you can't really apply across those types of systems, these different types of models, because they are different systems themselves. But we want to revisit that idea and applying these models or practices from them outside of what they call coordinated market economies. What we think is that some even liberal market economies, which could be debated what that means, could apply at a local level some of these types of models. So we're moving away from this technological and market deterministic approach to skills development, growth for the future, and we want to look with more attention to sustainability and a system that is socially grounded, that directly involves relevant stakeholders, including workers, unions, and employers, as well as the state. And we're not the first ones to do this. There's other panels about a little bit about this as well. And to bring it back into the industrial relations literature, there's a normative argument. We want to find what models work can be adapted to work that can be effective for this type of skills development, and it targeted at a broad range of technicians and workers. And again, we think at the local level, there's some good implications here. So the study that we did We focus on 6 EU countries: Austria, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, and Spain. We're asking questions around the structure of VET systems, providers, pathways to work, and future at training and education, and modifications that have been done in the past decade. What should be highlighted for future application and adapted to prepare technician workforce for the future of work. So we've done extensive literature on VET, career technical education, advanced technological education, technician training, a bunch of different terms around the same idea and model of training. And then we did interviews, which was very interesting, with at least one or more experts and researchers on VET from each of these countries, which was either a faculty member from a university or state, local government representative, as well as school representatives from the VET schools themselves. So the one thing there's a few things, I think, models we can highlight here. One being the flexibility of these European systems. And again, this varies within countries as well as across them, but I think we can kind of broadly say that they have more training and skilling that offers multiple options throughout life than the US may. They have multiple on and off ramps from VET program to the labor market, as well as to other areas of education like higher ed. So you can move more smoothly from VET to a higher education or general education track, or vice versa. That's sort of where this modularization comes in, and that does vary across countries within the EU. But you can return for future skills development at a later date as well, which is kind of this reskilling idea, and adult education, picking up where you left off. And there's a comprehensive systems for each program, even for a prior recognition of learning or work. Numerous program options, hundreds of them, which can kind of involve both both general education as well as vocational training. And like I mentioned, there's pathways to cross between those two tracks. And then there's also national and centralized qualification standards that are generally recognized across countries and even across the EU. So there's some coordination with the European Union there. So that's one big highlight, which is flexibility of these types of systems. Another is work and the emphasis on work-based learning opportunities, which come in various forms. So the social partners, being state at schools, as well as employers and unions, are largely involved in the development of these curriculums and implementing them. So that's at the national and the regional levels. And there's opportunities for innovation, especially at that local level involving VET schools. So almost every one of these programs that we've looked at across the countries has incorporated some form of work-based training, more or less. And that's even in countries that are primarily school-based for their VET training, or they use more apprentices for their VET training. Both will at least have some form of work-based learning. That can be in apprenticeship contracts, which is usually without much theoretical education. It's more practice-based and usually paid by the employer. And then there's this dual VET, which is flexible because it has a mix of academic training in schools as well as practical training with employers. And it's flexible to, again, like I mentioned before, go through these different tracks of general to vocational and vice versa. And there's also VET schools, like for example, in Spain, that kind of model workplace environments with similar equipment and technology that the workforce actually uses. And most of these have individualized planning for each student. So each student goes to kind of their own individual education plan. And then there's also social and cultural commitment to training, which can vary across countries, but it's kind of steeped in this institutional history of apprenticeships, for example, in Germany, that have been around for centuries almost. And that kind of has continued on as part of a tradition. And then the third big kind of theme we want to highlight here in Europe is that teacher training and professional development is a big deal, really, in these countries. There's a value of VET teachers as a profession, and I even want to compare this to the US, where it's not as similar to that. There's a socio-cultural aspect, and again, that gets back to the institutional histories. For example, in Finland, teaching and the profession is highly competitive. It's popular, but it's selective and hard to get into and through because it requires higher education, previous work experience, 3 years of it, and pedagogical teacher training. Also, teachers are generally around 40 when they enter, which is older than teachers in other areas of education because it takes so long. And there's also continuing training and autonomy to innovate and adapt curriculum at that level, as teachers do. They're well paid as well. And they have extensive training requirements, as I mentioned, across the board. And there's a kind of an emphasis on ongoing professional development, even what you don't see that much in the US is that they're done kind of with employers, in coordination with employers, to innovate curriculum. So they can even help connect students to employment to internships or apprenticeships, and know what types of technical and social skills are needed for the workforce. So that was kind of the broad overview of the highlights. But it sounds very rosy and great. What I do want to emphasize is in talking to the people we spoke that are experts in specific countries and these VT systems, there's a difference between practice versus policy. So the interviewees we talked to describe differences between policy in place and practice on the ground. So we do want to emphasize that there are issues within Europe and within these systems as well. So for example, in Germany, modularization is available, but it's not easy to do, and it's really not done much, according to the people we interviewed. In Spain, unions are considered social partners as part of that tripartite, but many only play an advisory role compared to that of the state employer. So it's kind of a second, they play a second level role. France education and VET, quote, has a tradition of being centralized, but people do their own thing. On paper it's structured, but on the ground it's not. And then certain programs may be available, but are not necessarily prioritized or very popular. And this is an example of initial VET apprenticeships in Finland. They're more popular, for later stages in tertiary education. And then even in the US, we have in Colorado, prior learning policy in community colleges, but only 4% of students use it. So again, there are these similar issues, but what we're kind of trying to say here is that because there are these issues, the US has similar ones. So there are ways potentially to apply certain models, I think, at a local level in the US, especially involving like community colleges and grant-funded programs through them that can help community colleges coordinate with employers in order to kind of do something similar to what Germany or a European country vet system does. So where to next? The implications, the lessons for the US. I think this is where I don't want to run out of time here. I might be over already. So I think I can open up for discussion or move on to the next presenter now. But these are just some kind of things we can talk about in the discussion, I believe. So thank you.
Just 10 minutes, Justin. You did it.
Oh, was it? Great. Awesome.
So for taking questions, I have to apologize to Anne-Claire Anderson. I think I said Hope Cotner, who was on some very early iteration of the proposal, and I messed up my introduction. So
not a problem at all.
Let you speak, or unless others have questions here, we can go on and have a discussion at the end after Steve. Okay. I think you can go ahead and share. I hope. And Claire, my brain is not working today. Where is my brain?
There, unmute myself. Yes, I'm Anne-Claire Anderson. I'm with the Center for Occupational Research and Development. We're an educational nonprofit that's been around for about 40 years and have always looked at technical training from the beginning. We were started by some engineers who noticed there was a need for laser electro-optics and photonics training, but that those who were getting the training weren't prepared, for example, in mathematics or science. And so therefore we have this kind of STEM focus. My role there is I work primarily in adult education and training with community and technical colleges. And currently I'm the PI for the Preparing Technicians for the Future of Work project, which has come out of the National Science Foundation. The background for the project is that NSF responded to very apparent changes in the environment and work tasks that of the group that they have termed, along with the National Science Board, the skilled technical workforce. They outline their priorities for addressing those. They put out an ambitious initiative called the 10 Big Ideas in 2018. And one of those was the future of work at the human technology frontier. And so from that, Cord was the recipient of an advanced technology education, an ATE grant from them. Those funds focus primarily on education at two-year colleges. So they look primarily at associate degrees and one-year certificates, and then all of the ancillary courses that go along with that, we kind of sneak in the back door. So when we started the project, we started off with a literature scan, reading everything we could that we could find on the workforce and rapidly changing technologies. And those technologies were one of the components that we were really interested in seeing how fast and what is coming to, for example, the manufacturing floor. There are really good analysis if you're interested. Deloitte has done good work. Burning Glass has done good work. McKinsey, National Skills Coalition, World Economic Forum, they've all done work in this area, looking at changing technology and looking at the future of work and the worker. What does that mean for the worker? One of the prevalent messages throughout is that the technical worker has to be a versatilist or maybe a super tech. So the Burning Glass quote on the slide kind of gives you the rationale behind our research work. As jobs come to be redefined by new modes of work, the result is hybridization that mashes together skills from disparate domains and demands greater breadth and flexibility of the workforce. Another word you'll hear quite a bit. I know at the National Science Foundation, they have a whole nother division looking at what they call convergence. So with that hybridization or cross-disciplinary idea in mind, we ask ourselves questions like, how do we as a country stay prepared for a rapidly changing future? How do we prepare students for evolving career pathways? What should we teach? Where should we teach it? Who should teach it? And what methods should we use? So these are some suppositions that are what we started with after asking those kind of questions. We recognize that technicians are already cross-disciplinary workers. They're immersed in diverse platforms and interrelated systems. And these systems used to belong to single industry sectors. This, compounded by the speed at which technology is changing and being adopted by industry, leads us to believe that there are new fundamental skills. And these need to be added to two-year technical degree programs and probably certificate programs and into stackable credentials. When I say new skills, I mean skills and knowledge that technicians haven't needed before or haven't been taught before. Another phenomenon to note is that as four-year and graduate degree programs become more complex to keep up with the pace and the changes in the science and technology, content that used to be taught at the university level is being pushed down into associate degree programs. So that also is changing the need for skills and knowledge that they get in those programs. Our second wave of research involved convening educators and industry representatives nationally and regionally, and doing a lot of site visits at industry, doing industry interviews with technicians, supervisors, middle managers, HR at plant sites all over the country. Out of this, as a finding, we confirmed the need for cross-disciplinary STEM core content applicable in all technical workforce training programs, both credit and non-credit, in advanced digital literacy, data knowledge and analysis, and business knowledge and processes. I'll show you those skills. These are the topics that rose to the top within the three categories. So we'll start with advanced digital literacy. So a side note is that we had to address the issue that not everyone knows what all of these terms mean. And we subsequently had to have subject matter experts develop definitions so that industry and education and employers from a lot of different fields and sectors could talk about the competencies needed, which means that if you don't know what digital twin technology is, you're in very good company. A brilliant biotechnology instructor that I work with often in NSF projects didn't know either. So that's kind of where we stand. We are still siloed in our understanding. You think IT is IT and data is data. The knowledge and skills for data knowledge and analysis are here, and you see some of them are nested into bigger categories, although in our work we address all of them. Technology is advancing, and so with that, as I said, comes convergence. We are, as you know, in the era of big data, gigantic data. It's being generated from almost any large process you can think of. Think about autonomous vehicles, for example. Every autonomous vehicle's gathering and sending data back. That's a tremendous amount of data. So within data knowledge and analysis, you have topics that are applied alongside topics that you just saw. You've got digital knowledge and data knowledge working hand in hand because it's necessary. They have converged. The impact on future technicians is pretty apparent. They can't be siloed within a sliver of a sector. Now, as a project, we're not advocating that they become experts in all of these topics, but we are recommending that they be familiar with how these topics are relevant to their jobs and also where those points of convergence lie. That becomes critically important when they work in teams. They're going to work in cross-disciplinary teams, whether they know that or not. That's how we work in today's workforce. Our final category is business knowledge and processes. Not always a topic that we think about when we're designing STEM technician education programs, unless we talk about employability or those soft skills. You'll notice that there are a couple on this list that have that kind of crossover into that. And those skills are mentioned with a very high priority, but this project is more about the technical intersection. We do have another NSF project that looks solely at integration of employability skills into technical fields. Okay, all this to say, our project advocates highly, strongly, integrating the teaching of these new fundamentals within STEM education programs. To make this happen, career and technical education providers, and so although my project is aimed at pleasing the National Science Foundation with their 2-year and community college focus in this program, this applies, I think, to broader providers of technical education. So they will need to prioritize topics locally or regionally, while understanding that the topics will not have equal weight in every locale, and some may need to be taught at greater depth depending on the employer priority. They will need to determine integration points. Where do these topics fit? For example, in which geospatial technologies or advanced manufacturing courses does it make sense to include a lesson on cybersecurity? Notice I say lesson and not course. They'll need to develop real world scenarios. That's a critical component of the lessons. This helps answer that question of why am I learning something that doesn't really look like it's in my field? They'll need to provide faculty development. Again, how do I teach this? This is not really my field. And they'll need to support systemic change. We need to get out of siloed thinking across the institution, across the organization. I think it's equally important that you know what the project is not doing. We are not creating industry skill standards. We are not telling colleges where to put the content in the curriculum. We are not advocating creation of new courses. We are not setting the level at which new content should be taught. And we're not advocating whole-scale creation of new technical programs. So we're trying to do something that feels like it should be bite-sized and easy to do, but in many circumstances, implementation will have challenges and it'll be easier in other cases. So we have to ask who needs to be involved to make all of this change happen. For our project, which focuses on technician education at the two-year college, we need deans, both academic and workforce/continuing ed, and program chairs to do an inventory of program content, to determine whether current courses can be modified by infusing lessons that integrate cross-disciplinary skills or by replacing topics that are becoming obsolete. They will need to figure out how to teach instructors how to integrate these concepts. They'll also need to coordinate collaboration between the non-credit and the credit sides of the house. If they're not speaking, then they either do double duty or they miss pockets of content that they need to provide. Program faculty would need to ask their industry advisory board members and other employer partners to prioritize those cross-disciplinary STEM core topics. Out of these, which ones are the most critical that we need to jump on first? They'll need to work with employer partners to create authentic workplace scenarios as the basis for the instruction. Again, think lessons or modules, not whole courses. Program faculty needs to be willing to teach lessons that aren't in their field. And of course, professional development helps with that. College presidents, you may be surprised to see them on the list, but we need them to champion and adopt systemic approaches to preparing technicians for the future of work and to promote that cross-disciplinary collaboration and accumulation of skills across the college's STEM technical education programs. There's a role for industry and employer partners, of course. We need their help prioritizing topics within cross-disciplinary STEM core for inclusion in the technical education programs. And we need them to co-lead curriculum development by actively participating in a business industry leadership team. It's a model of employer engagement that's really robust. It's usually called the BUILT model. And as such, when they do this, they provide ongoing input, yearly input on the knowledge and skills needed, and not just a, once a semester or once a year dinner where they're presented with what's going to be done. So if all of this piques your interest, we have a white paper coming out, I think in July, and I'll be happy to share that with you. And I look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne Claire. And I have Iris Palmer coming up next. We have probably a good 10 minutes for Iris and then 10 minutes for Steve to comment, and then that should give us 10 minutes or so for discussion. So go forward.
So first of all, let me say that if all of the things my colleagues have covered today were actually in place in the United States, my work would have been so much easier. So thank you, Justin and Claire, for sharing your work. And I think if we can move in that direction, it's wonderful. So I'm Iris Palmer. I'm a senior advisor for higher education in the workforce at New America. We're a think tank in DC, and I basically coordinate a whole bunch of our work on community colleges. And today I'm going to focus on how community colleges influence job quality, but I'll tell you a little bit about a very far-ranging project that we have going on that got us into this space. So first of all, the project, it's called New Models of Career Preparation. And we were approached in 2019 to really try to understand and elevate quality non-degree programs at community colleges. So we had to figure out what quality means and the outcomes, and we don't have any kind of skills definition in the United States. And then we had to find what we considered quality programs and figure out what made them tick. And really, we wanted to tell those stories. So as part of our research, we did a whole bunch of interviews. We did a lit review, including a bunch of the people on this conversation looking at their work in this space. We did scans of publicly available data, and we ended up identifying quality programs, thinking about criteria around job quality, and really like defining what we felt quality outcomes looked like in this space. We also assembled an advisory committee of experts from very cross-sectional academia, employers, intermediaries, obviously community colleges. And we launched a cohort of 6 community colleges with quality non-degree programs, or what we thought were quality non-degree programs, which we are working to reverse engineer over the next year. We gave them pretty small grants to just talk to us and like use their energy to help us research what worked for them. And really what we're trying to do here, like I said, is figure out the storytelling piece of this. I don't think I can access the chat here, which is unfortunate because I can't go over exactly the programs we ended up picking because it'll take too much time, but it is in a blog post that I will share in the chat after I'm done presenting. So what is a non-degree program at a community college? We took a very broad view of this. And this is very relevant to this particular conversation because non-degree programs at community colleges are very much a focus of the recovery. They're a focus of the federal government's investment. And so we really wanted to know what quality looked like. So we think anything certificates, badges, micro-credentialing, both for credit and non-credit, industry awarded certification prep programs, occupational licensure prep programs, boot camps, apprenticeships, skill building workshop, customized training, almost anything that a community college does that does not end in a degree, except maybe personal enrichment, fell in this bucket of programs that we were looking at. And with our literature review and our discussions with the field, these were the 5 criteria we came up with for identifying quality non-degree programs. I don't think these will come as a surprise to anyone here. The first, of course, and most important, I might argue, maybe not most important, but very important, are labor market outcomes. So there's evidence that the credential leads to, or the program leads to in-demand, high-quality job that provides at least a local living wage, equity, that the program reflects the college community, the community in which the college is situated, and also is diversifying the occupation into which it is supposed to be leading, because this is a very segregated part of the labor market. It stacks to further education as the student or learner is interested in pursuing further education. It's affordable, it has a low price point, there's some kind of financial aid eligibility, employers pay for it maybe, and completion, it has a respectable completion rate and licensure certification exam passage rate as applicable. So this is a very high level criteria that we ended up using to identify our high quality programs, our cohort of 6 that we found. I want to go a little bit deeper into the job quality piece, because the intersection between the conversation and job quality in sort of the workforce space and the education space has not been bridged very well, I would say, which is why I wanted to focus on it in this presentation. So when we were thinking about job quality, we used the following criteria. So the local living wage, I told you about, the MIT calculator for a single adult. I understand this is controversial. There's lots of different ways to do it. This, because we're not experts in this space, we were like, this looks good to us. So that's what we ended up using for the local living wage. Some kind of security, so the amount of turnover was reasonable. This is one of the reasons we did not consider truck driving certs in our job quality rubric or in our programs. The quality of the working environment, so opportunities for advancement, clear pathways, benefits, education and training, health insurance, paid leave, safety and health. This became very important during COVID, but also, for instance, lineman certificates at community colleges can lead to very, very high paying jobs, 6 figures even for somebody with a high school diploma and a certificate. It is also one of the most dangerous occupations in the country, according to OSHA, with the highest rates of injury and death. And so we thought, you know, probably not a quality job. Not that we're saying people can't choose it, but probably not a quality job because it's so dangerous. Predictability and flexibility, so being able to have some kind of sense of your schedule from month to month, and being able to have flexibility around your desired workload, respectful culture, some kind of worker voice engagement. I will say some of these are easier to quantify than others. We mostly probably looked at advancement, local living wage, safety and health to some extent, and predictability in scheduling. So how are community colleges actively grappling with job quality? We actually spoke with over 20 different community colleges and community college associations over the spring, summer, and fall while they were pivoting online and dealing with the outcomes from COVID. And we actually heard, yes, community colleges are absolutely grappling with this question of job quality. And this quote sums it up nicely. This community college association leader who spoke to us said, "Phlebotomy is an example where we're having a really hard time getting students into these programs because you can make as much money at McDonald's. We have to have a conversation about the morality of that and whether there is something we can do to either help push up those salaries or whether it means getting out of the business of training for them." And this really sets up the dichotomy that community colleges are facing. Is there a way they can improve the job quality, or do they just have to make a decision straight up on whether or not they have the moral standing to actually train for these types of jobs? And this, by the way, is even more important in the recovery as we try to build back better or have a better working environment for people coming out of the recession. So how can community colleges support job quality, and what are we seeing in the field? So the first is that program choice piece. We spoke with a community college that went through the entire DACOM process with a call center operator employer and decided in the end of all of that work with the employer that the quality of the job was just too bad and they couldn't justify training for that employer. We spoke with a different community college who made the choice with call center operators to train incumbent call center operators, but not new call center operators, making that distinction between helping somebody progress in their career versus bringing new people into what they considered a very low quality job. We also heard about different community colleges, which I'll talk a little bit more later, who were refusing to train for some of those low-level healthcare positions. We heard about cosmetology. We heard about a few where there was different kinds of justification for why or why not they decided to offer training programs in sort of jobs that were maybe marginal. Another piece we've seen a lot of is using innovative delivery models, particularly work-based learning. I will say there's a work-based learning component in almost all 6 of the programs that we are profiling. And I think that the impact of this is twofold. One, or maybe threefold. One, employers who use work-based learning and participate in work-based learning are probably generally better quality because they're willing to invest in their workers, number one. Number two, even if it's not what we would consider maybe the highest quality job in the world, see linemen, if the student knows what they're getting into, it takes a little bit of the moral obligation maybe off the community college to make sure that it's a high quality opportunity that the student is going into. And three, I think over time, as colleges develop that relationship with the employer, they may be able to move the benchmark and the goalposts for the quality of that job as they move along. That's the hope. We haven't necessarily seen that yet, but that is something we're looking at a little bit deeper. And the last way is really working with employers to improve job quality. And what does that look like? So you can either do it through partnerships. I'm talking about the High Road Training Partnerships here, which are state grants funded in California to support employers that they consider particularly high quality and connect them to training partners. So if community colleges plug into these types of efforts to improve job quality, they have a lot more power in the situation where they can actually improve the job quality with employers because they're working with either local government or state government or labor or some of these other organizations that maybe have a little bit more power to change employer behavior. However, we have actually seen community colleges working directly with employers to improve the quality of the job. So one of our cohort is Monroe Community College, who anyone who knows workforce knows that they do very nice work on it. But they refused over the years to do a certified nursing assistant program. Anyone who knows about certified nursing assistants also knows that it is a very, what I would consider a very low quality job. It's a very necessary job, a very important job. I will clarify that, but it is poverty wages. It's a schedule that is unpredictable. And it is actually pretty dangerous depending on the care situation or the situation, like where they're working, where the certified nursing assistant is working. So the college was actually approached by an employer who lost the ability to train his own workforce. He was desperate. And because he was desperate, I'll just call him he, the employer was desperate. He was willing to do an experiment with Monroe where they used grant money to support a cohort program for certified nursing assistant. And the employer agreed to increase the wages for starting CNAs, pay them during their training, have the training be on the job site, and gave them more control over their schedules, and created new pathways for advancement for people who decided they weren't cut out to be nurses, and also for students that did decide they wanted to progress in the nursing progression. So all of those things improved the job quality for those CNAs. Monroe was able to demonstrate through the work with this employer that they were able to cut down on turnover so significantly that it actually was worth the extra money the employer was paying. And they were able to demonstrate that benefit to a lot of the other employers in the region, who then came onto the program, and they have been able to replicate that. They also, because of the pandemic, have gotten a ton of push from employers around home health aides and patient care technicians, which are both really low quality jobs, very necessary once again. But because of the desperation of the employers at that point, they have been able to use this same model, actually a faster version of it, to try to replicate the increases in job quality that they've seen with their CNA program, which basically means that Monroe is able to contribute to the increasing job quality for the care economy, which should be a focus for all of us and is definitely a focus for the Biden administration. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Crawford.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. And kudos to all of you for some very interesting reports on some important research that goes to the heart of some major challenges we as a country face in preparing our young people, but also workers who are losing their jobs and will continue to lose their jobs, whether due to pandemics and the shutdowns or whether due to automation and offshoring and other things that are going to happen. And so we need a much better system. Incidentally, I refer you to, if you're interested, to a series of policy briefs by the Better Employment and Training Strategies task force that includes a major paper on workforce development and ways to improve it. Let's say a few words about these presentations. I didn't think that when I saw the title of the session, I thought it was going to be about the role of education and training in the COVID-19 recovery. But what I found was it's less about that. It's about technical workers. It's not about getting hospitality and restaurant workers into new jobs. But it's about models that work when it comes to educating middle skill workers, especially technical ones. And on that, these sessions, these presentations for me offer much of great interest. I learned a great deal. And but in my comments, I'll make remarks about where I think there could be, we could ask some questions about where we're going with these. And I start by just emphasizing the you know, when we talk about good models, and we have a session on good models, whether they're in Europe or they're community colleges or their improvements to a hybridized technical curriculum, to remind us that how hard it is to replicate and scale promising boutique models. And in particular, because unlike Austria, Denmark, and Finland, the US is not one economy, it's many economies. And some of those are high-skill, high-tech ones of the kinds we find on the East and West coasts. And some of them are low-skill, low-tech ones. And they have a very different challenges and interests that sometimes, as Mark Tucker argues beautifully, trap them in an equilibrium that is very hard to break out of. And I think we have to keep that challenge and that context in mind when we make nice ideas about good ways to do technical education. He develops that interest, incidentally, in the last chapter of his book, his edited book, Vocational Education and Training for a Global Economy. I point out that Michelle Weiss, in her new book, Long Life Learning, reminds us that labor markets are hyper-local, not just in terms of their mix of industries and occupations, but the specific skills that a particular occupation requires. So cybersecurity is a high-demand occupation, right? But the specific skills sought by cybersecurity employers in Washington, D.C., St. Louis, and Columbus, Ohio, vary considerably. Similarly, in addition, local populations vary widely in what skills they already have due to their past education, training, and work experience. And so effective education and training providers need to address with precision that very specific gap between what local employers need, the skills they need, and what the local population already has, which is often invisible and needs clarification through various assessment techniques. And when it comes to doing that for the 40 million adults, working adults who don't have degrees and are not in a position to go back to school full-time, or perhaps even part-time, the training providers, if you will, the community colleges included, will have to offer the needed instruction in flexible, modularized, tech-enabled, and yet personally supportive formats, and to offer non-degree credentials in small bites that reliably attest to the skills obtained. All that's a tall order, but good models are still important as informative stimuli for leaders who appreciate the needs to adapt them to these hyper-local circumstances. And states like Colorado's are already doing so impressively in adopting the Swiss model of apprenticeship, for example, as was mentioned. Let's turn to the presentation on EU technical education. I thought it did an excellent job of explaining the several features of several model VET programs, such as their moldable off and on ramps and their openness to innovation. I have to say, that was a surprise to me. One does not think, go back to Peter Drucker, he had contempt for the sort of rigidity of the European systems of both occupational regulation and for their career training. And I wrote a dissertation about French technical workers a long time ago. And I'm astonished to think of Europe now as a model of flexibility, that was the word I think used, and of lifelong on and off ramps. But I'm delighted to learn that they've come a long way. So that's the good news. That may be a good segue to, hold on a second. I think I may have skipped a page here with my notes. The typical criticism of Europe notwithstanding, that does not mean US technical workers aren't also at risk of being ill-prepared for the future of technical worker. Anne Claire's presentation reports on a fascinating project to better prepare them by identifying the STEM core content that should be included in all technical workforce training programs. I was intrigued by the specifics of that content and a little daunted. advanced digital literacy, data knowledge and analytics, and business knowledge and processes. Did you read that list? Entrepreneurship, risk assessment, et cetera. I mean, it's like the combination of a business school education and an engineering school education. And while I liked her analysis of the challenge of getting our education and training programs to provide such training, challenges of curriculum design, of faculty development, of moving out of traditional silos, I had a reservation, and that is, I'm not sure our students, she talked about moving content down from the 4-year to the 2-year level. I'm not sure our students coming out of our K through 12 system are up to that. So it begs the question, and it's a question that's been raised time and time again, are we doing what we need to be doing at the K through 12 level to have students ready to take on the ever greater challenges that we're talking about cognitively, and who's going to be successful and not, and what kinds of implications for inequality and other divisions. That said, the score, I also wonder whether many colleges are up to making the needed changes of creating hybrid programs. We've talked about doing away with departments from time to time. If you've tried that as a dean, you've probably lived to regret it. That may be a good segue into Iris Palmer's revealing report of an ambitious effort to improve non-degree programs at community colleges. No one who knows me will be surprised that I applaud the attention to institutions that are incorporating non-degree credentials, including apprenticeships, boot camps, certification and license prep programs, and skill-focused certificates and badges. One longstanding challenge regarding non-degree credentials has been the uncertainty about their quality and market value. So I especially like her 5 key criteria for identifying quality programs. But what I liked most about this project is the focus on job quality and working with employers to improve it. Though, of course, job quality is a tricky concept, because what strikes me as a low-quality job may strike a dog-walking gig worker as a much better one than they have now. And so we have to be careful about telling people what we know is good for them. But that said, I generally applaud and agree with those criteria. And in any event, traditionally, community colleges have been passive on this front. At best, they insisted on only training for employers who offered quality jobs, but it wasn't they who pressed for changing the quality of existing jobs. It was the workforce intermediaries, especially those pursuing sector strategies, Project Quest being most famous in this area, that were more aggressive in pressing employers to improve job quality. And their negotiating stance was, if you want the services we provide, we'll help you recruit workers, but you're not going to get our cooperation unless you offer decent jobs, including this and that. It's better scheduling, better autonomy, better opportunities for promotion and training. So Nicola Lowe, in her recent book, Putting Skills to Work, gives examples of a few community colleges in North Carolina, for example, who perform these workforce intermediary functions, but they are the exception. I love Iris's CNA example and like to think that Selma Project will lead to many more community colleges becoming more proactive about performing the functions of a workforce intermediary, which means not just providing the skills that are demanded by local employers, but negotiating with them about the job quality in return. My only question about that is that the tension between preparing students for jobs that exist now and negotiating with employers around that versus preparing for them for the jobs of the future that that we heard about in the other paper. If community colleges are going to be successful in negotiating with employers about job quality, they have to offer what the latter need now. And so that's going to be problematic. We've already said to them, you've got to incorporate all these non-degree credentials into your curriculum. You've got to do more work-based learning and internships and all of that. And now we're saying to them, you got to prepare people for the jobs of the future, break down old, retrain faculty, break down old departmental barriers. So my question is, is that it's a lot to ask of the unwieldy, underfunded institutions called community colleges. I hope that your presentations and the storytelling involved in the New America Project will somehow inspire enough key players to understand the importance of moving forward in this area, that they will provide the resources and the sort of leadership that has the strength to overcome the resistances that are built into the existing system, and do both getting better job quality now and preparing workers for jobs of the future.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, and thank you, everyone. I guess we all had a lot to say. We're just about to the end of our time. I don't know if any of the panelists want to quickly respond to anything that Steve brought up, or anything that came out in some of the questions. I know there's been a nice lively discussion going on in chat, which is wonderful. I don't know if Anne Claire, Iris, or Justin want to jump in.
I just want to say here to the future workforce needs, and it's something we really want to plug community colleges and technicians more squarely into the development of new technologies, which Anne Claire talked a little bit about, and it's like the next phase of this work. So thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's been great. And if we can save this chat, I don't know if we can download everything that we've had in this discussion. Maybe we can continue on through email or some other form in the future, because I think this is an important conversation to, move forward.
Definitely. Hey, any other last words, questions, comments, thoughts? I think we should definitely continue this conversation.
Yeah,
Like
I do, but I won't get into it now.
Yes, that's fine. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us and for being part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Can you hear me, Michelle?
I can. I was just trying to save the chat.
I apologize. I must have run over time and I wasn't paying attention at all.